Good day, everybody. Rimfire friends. So I have in the shop today the Schultz and Larsen model M47, and one of the things that when I started this YouTube channel, I noticed was there's a lot of these obscure rifles out there, this one included, where there is almost no information online, and I should say mainly YouTube specific. It's incredibly difficult to find any sort of detailed information on one of these. You can find lots of, threads on Rimfire Central, etc., discussing such rifles and different models, and everybody seems to be in the same boat. It's tough to narrow down any concrete information on them. And the people who have them don't seem to be the type that share the information easily. And I don't think that's something they do deliberately. It's just, not everybody is about sharing such information. Some people would just rather shoot. I would rather shoot. But anyway, so one of my commitments to starting this YouTube channel was putting up information about these obscure rifles and filming videos and in the flesh, so to speak, so people could see, what they have and connect with others and, have some kind of resource when it comes to them. I think my videos that I've shot of this one are the only ones on YouTube that I've found anyway. And I would like to see so many more because there's some interesting opinions that I have about this rifle, and I'm going to share them a little bit throughout this video. So my point to this video today was, as I've said before, I absolutely love this rifle, and this is one of my favorite rifles for a whole host of reasons. First and foremost, it is incredibly accurate. And accuracy is key in my world, and I can work around almost anything else. But if it doesn't shoot well, it doesn't stay long. That's just how it is. Now, not everything shoots at, superior match level, but this one does. And yes, it has quirks, and yet it has some issues like no ejector, super annoying. But you can live with stuff like that. I like to shoot this gun because I mentioned in the first video I shot of it, or I filmed with it rather, was that it is a procedure to shoot, and you have to be on your game to shoot this, and it keeps me humble. You make a mistake in this rifle, will remind you, positions all over the place. You have to really calculate things. Now, that's me. Some people could just sit down and shoot it, I'm sure, but for me, I enjoy the procedure. So today, what I wanted to do was, I talked about the rifle in depth. I talked about its shooting performance before, but today I would like to talk about the bolt, and specifically disassembling the bolt. I don't think I'm going to go into full strip where I'll strip the firing pin, but I'll talk about it, because one of the key things that this rifle has that a lot of rifles don't have is simplicity. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say with rifles like this, or older Husqvarna or Carl Gustaf rifles, stuff like that, old Walthers, well, there's no parts available, so if something breaks, you're hooped. Now, in a lot of cases, that's true. If you break a Walther match trigger, a structural part, you might be in trouble. On this guy, the really interesting thing about it is you get a true match gun. A little rough around the edges and not as refined, don't get me wrong. But what you get is the ability to manufacture parts easily or source parts easily oneself. And there are very few match rifles of this level, in my opinion, where you can successfully do that. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, foremost, we'll get the bolt out of here. Now on this particular one, there's a bolt stop over here, which I flipped. But anyway, this locks the bolt in place. And that's so you can basically tune it down to the, low ounces. Okay, so you flip it over like that, it's spring loaded, and the bolt slides out. Okay, so we're just gonna move this big fella off to the side. So, listen, I'm not gonna tell you everything you need to know about this particular rifle when it comes to disassembly or making parts. That's up to you guys. I'm gonna tell you need a few very simple tools here. We need some quality flat screwdrivers, a couple pin punches, a couple picks just in case. And we're going to go over quickly disassembling it. Now, I haven't disassembled and cleaned this since the last time I shot it, so you're going to see basically what's involved. we'll have a quick look at it. And like I said, these pictures alone, or as I'm taking them, are quite unusual because there's just not a lot on YouTube about them. And so, as a resource, I think it's important to share information like this. Okay, so we have the firing pin right there. It's a typical European, round conical style firing pin. Nice beefy single, if I could focus on that, extractor. Spring loaded. Has a plunger system right here. It's very well made, and again, like, you break an extractor in one of these, it wouldn't be overly difficult to manufacture one yourself. Not a lot of fun, but definitely something that you could do. Now, the beauty on these is I've actually had a few Schultz and Larsens in my time, and on one of them I was at the range one day, and my very first shot, the firing pin shattered. It's actually the only time that's really ever happened to me in a target rifle before. And like I said, you can't find parts for them anywhere. But I was actually able to manufacture this from a drill bit, a 1/8 drill bit. And it's actually quite simple. There's a pin that goes through, a cross pin, and it corresponds with a notch. And the firing pin is quite short. And basically, I used a Dremel and I cut a groove in the firing pin, and that the pin retains it in the slot. Super simple to make. So you can't buy one, but believe me, it's not a super complicated design like even a modern Savage rimfire with the multiple levels and angles, and it's not like that at all on this particular one. So a little bit easier, and I'm going to show you when I open it up. So at the back you got a large slotted screw, and you can see it freely rotates, and that's important because it offers a couple of features and tunability. So I'm loosening this slotted screw here, and there's a relationship here. You can see where there's a gap forming. So the only thing I'll tell you is, there's common sense here. So I've got this little silicone dish mat from the dollar store. I like to use this sort of thing because it kind of creates a catch-all, and I'll show you what I mean. So I can lay it in there, and I can get my slotted screwdriver in the slot, and I can turn. And so, I'm getting a grip on it, but if something was to fly out, it would hopefully catch on the side of the pan, finger kind of thing. So, use your judgment with this. Now, it is under a little bit of spring pressure. There, you saw it pop out, but it's nothing crazy. But again, having the little pan like that makes a big difference. So the slotted screw came out. Nice manufacture, very cleanly made. All right, so then we have our firing pin spring, and the beauty of this as well is this is not a crazy difficult to find spring. You could probably source one of these quite easily, and based on the firing pin imprint that this spring produces, there's lots of power left on this old one. So when you get to this stage, you slowly unscrew the front of the bolt head, and then they come apart. And what you're unscrewing is actually this portion at the back. Okay, I like to hold it like this when I unscrew it. It kind of keeps everything together. Okay, so you've got this threaded portion at the back, and you could lay them out in order. I've done this a couple of times. So anyway, and then the bolt handle comes off. And what's important here is, I don't know if you saw it fall out, but you have a shim here. Okay, now the interesting thing about this shim in this particular rifle is this shim is rough cut. So I don't know if you can make that out, but you can see a couple of jagged edges here and there. So this shim, the way that this bolt is designed, by shimming at this portion of the bolt head, what you're doing when you close the bolt, because there is a lug, so the lug centers, and sorry that fell out there. When you close the bolt, when you have a shim applied here where it was, you're applying or you're reducing the space where the rim is. So you're reducing headspace. The reason that's important is you can custom adjust headspace based on shims. So I don't know the degree of the shim. The rifle came with it. I figure somebody before me, before my time, put the shim in here and moved the headspace closer. That's important for a few reasons. You can increase accuracy, but usually one of the reasons that people do stuff like that is to position the extractor closer to the rim, so it aids in extraction, is my experience. So sometimes people will say, like I know on a modern CZ 457 and 455, you can shim the bolt head and reduce headspace. sometimes gaining more accuracy. Not always, but in my experience, the main reason to do it is help with extraction and injection. And sometimes the benefit is more positive ignition, because essentially when you're moving this closer, and you're staying within specs, of course, you allow the firing pin to make a deeper indentation in the case. And in some cases that might help you if you have a shallow firing pin. In other cases, not so much. Now, there's a little bit of caution to be said with that, because if you position this too closely and close your bolts, if you have your firing pin in there, like when you're doing tests, you can actually set off the round when you close your bolt. So if you're doing tests to see what works and what doesn't, you'll have to pull the firing pin during these tests. And when I do them, I actually will Sharpie the back of the case and close it and see what my engagement is like. This would be a little bit more involved because you'd have to drift out the pin and try it that way. But it's a good way to tune a rifle or to help with extraction. And I think somebody at one time, based on what I see this, and I saw this before when I first took it apart, it's a little bit jagged, and it's not quite even, it's close. But these shims, like I bought shims for my CZs off Amazon, and they come in different sizes. Excuse me, you usually get 10 or 12 and all the way down. And you can play with different ones and match them together until you find one that you're happy with. So it's something that's not new. Lots of, I think even commercially you can buy, some companies offer bolt shims, but you can just find them on Amazon. The key is here, you got to find the measurements. So you got to get your bolts and use some calipers and figure them out. But generally when they're thin like this, they're usually hardened steel, so you got to be a little bit careful of them, but you can just size them down, sometimes even with scissors or light shears, and clean them up with a Dremel. This one looks like it's just been trimmed with like a scissor or something. It's a little bit jagged. Anyway, so that's basically the bolt. These are all, I didn't show this piece. So this piece fell out, and that's the Sear and essentially the hammer. And so that rides in here like this. Okay? And that's actually the Sear that when you have your firing pin in, excuse me, and the bolt would be here, the handle would be here, you can see that this is what catches, and the trigger controls this little guy right here. Okay? So, like, don't get me wrong, this part would not be an easy one to manufacture, and you wouldn't want to monkey with this one too much in terms of stoning Sears, and that's why I always try not to do that sort of thing. What I typically will do, I mentioned it here and there, is I'll polish it on like a wheel. Like a focus there. I'll polish it on a wheel, and I won't actually stone it. And you can see those surfaces, they're getting some wear, of course, from the trigger itself and the different components, but the surfaces are excellent. And it's a real, I don't know if I can get it this way or not. There we go. I'll try to get it in the camera there. Look at those surfaces. So for a gun that was made in the 40s, and I'm sure, look at that. I have not cleaned these up on a file or stoning them. This is what I mean about a rifle like this. The parts are made so simply, this is it, that if a part does fail, it would be relatively easy to manufacture. This one would probably be the most difficult, just because, listen, it wouldn't be super easy to make that, but the likelihood of this failing, there's no moving parts. And if anything, like if this surface surface was to get rough or gouged from overuse, a simple weld on top and working it down to build up the surface again would be my solution. Snapping in half would be the big catastrophic failure, but what are the odds of that when there's no actual sort of stress like that on this part, as it's a hammer in a slot? So anyway, very simple design. And again, you can't of course see down in there totally, but in that is where the firing pin is. And the firing pin is extremely short. So the firing pin's in here. It's got to be, I don't remember when I repaired mine how. I'll try to get an idea here. So the firing pin essentially, I would say, is from this portion to here, like under an inch. Very small piece. That's what I said. Like you keep those broken bits of drill bits. I know I do. When I snap a drill bit, I put it in a little box and I hang on to it for stuff like this. So, a simple cut-off wheel on a Dremel, cut a slot in it and play with it. I think I turned it in a drill on a piece of sandpaper to get the profile. Believe me, it took about a dozen disassemblies and reassemblies, on some old cases to get the profile right. But my point is there's something that you can do yourself relatively easily, and certainly a gunsmith could fix that no trouble. Same with the shims. A shim will act as a bearing as well and will help with wear, and so maybe that's why somebody installed this at one point. I have not taken it apart to see, you know, if it made a difference, but you can see the surface here where the bearing rides is mint. There's no gouging. There's just wear, like typical surface wear. Same on the bolt handle. Just nice, even surfaces. There's nothing weird going on there. Like, I can definitely see some wear. And you can feel like a slight burr, just from, I think, from years of use, or maybe just the machining process. But certainly nothing dramatic. And there's a good view of the lug. And like, I cleaned this rifle up when I got it because it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. But like, the surfaces are excellent. Excellent, because it was made excellently, and that's the cool thing. So like, when people say, oh, shy away from this one because, oh, the parts aren't available, well, before you say, hey, you know, that scares me a little bit, because, you know, listen, not everybody feels comfortable making parts, and I totally get it, but it's simpler than you think sometimes. And yes, if it was an Anschutz or a Walther or a fine work bow with, you know, crazy, like, you know, in my next video I'll film the Schultz and Larsen's double set trigger, and I'll compare it to the Anschutz's double set trigger. And, you know, one is like, you know, a craftsman made in his basement shop, the Schultz and Larsen, and one is made over-engineered like it belongs in the space station, the Anschutz. They both function and do the same thing. Excuse me, and they both are closer in performance than one would think. I feel. So anyway, this is basically the rough disassembly, and I was going to clean this up a little bit, but I'll show you kind of the quick assembly of it, or maybe I'll save that for another video for you guys, but I'll put it together now basically. So it couldn't be any simpler the way that you put it together, you know. And the orientation is quite simple because, you know, it's easy to remember what side the ejector runs on. And so then it's more a case of, you know, getting everything set up the way that you remember it. But like, listen, you put stuff on backwards, what does it matter? You can just redo it, right? Okay, so, you know, this is basically how the bolt should look. Nothing weird about that. This is where you can see the scallop cut out there. That's where your bolt stop, that spring-loaded piece on the receiver ride, so you can use that for orientation. I use it to kind of grip onto it, you know. And then we had that threaded piece from before. So the threads go all the way through, and, you know, like, there's a nice rounded portion at the back. It's easy to remember that sort of thing because that's a common sense thing. The rounded portion would be sticking out where would work in the receiver and wouldn't have a sharp object. The nice square surface would go against the other nice square surface. To me, that's just a common sense thing. So the way that I like to do this is I like to I screw them all together, and I don't adjust it to the end. Now, this bolt you can adjust by hand. So like right now it spins great, it's wicked. And then you can kind of play with it a little bit and it starts to bind right away. Now, of course, you can't feel that, but you can kind of see what I mean. When I tighten it just a hair, you can see it just falls. So these are little things that you can play with. And that won't affect headspace because the shim is after the bolt lug, so the locking lug. So once this is closed and locked in place here, this part is adjustable dependent on that shim, whether or not it's there or what size it is. So the distance changes based on your shim. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So again, the hardest part here, and like, listen, you can do this a couple of different ways. You can back this off basically just till you have minimal thread engagement, which I recommend if you've never done it before. So you just get a couple of threads. You don't want to cross thread it, but you just get it a little bit like that so it's holding on to for you. Okay, and then you can go back to putting it on the edge of the mat. In this case, nitrile gloves don't really help you because they kind of pinch, but anyway, you get it started, just a couple of threads, okay, like that. And then you go back to turning this down. See what I'm talking about here? because you threaded that up so you were able to get the screw started under the spring pressure. Keep an eye on that, because if it starts to back out a little bit, it'll fly out. I just watch it while I'm tightening it every turn. I have a quick look at it like that while I'm doing it. And again, we don't want to over tighten it here because it's starting to bind. And then the tighter you put this, the more tension that spring is under when it comes to compression. So it goes in and then it stops. And so I usually tighten it into about there, and I'm not a gorilla about it. And then we're going back to the bolt turns relatively freely, and you can kind of play around with the tension you put on it until you get it spinning. And then it's very easy to tighten this, and because it's bottomed out on the spring, you're actually turning the threaded piece at the end here, and there's just a slight amount of binding there, and if I go too far it won't even turn at all. And you saw how little I turned that, so it's like you can see that the bolt is kind of sitting by itself there. When I loosen it, see how that happens? And like if you watch my screwdriver, I'll do it again for you. Okay, so you watch the edge of my screwdriver, how little I'm moving it. So I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch, not very much. So you kind of play with it until it's, you're happy with the movement. And like I put this together dry, of course. I don't like a lot of, sometimes I'll put a little bit of Ballistol grease just on the edges, but you want to keep it away from the internal parts as much as you can, especially if you shoot in a cold climate like me, colder climate. You just play with it a little bit, okay? So that's there's just a slight amount. So we'll call that good there. And that's the completely assembled bolt. That's all there is to it. And then normally, of course, you would clean and you would wipe, but you can see that, there's not a lot of areas to worry about. And you can see the Sear, that's the little hammer piece in there that we talked about, the surfaces being excellent. This guy down here, spring, that's the hammer Sear. And then in here is the firing pin. Well, this like basically an inch here. Like, couldn't be easier. So anyway, that's the bolt of the Schultz and Larsen. And the ones that I've had, they're all basically like this. There's no difference. My handle is different because I've made that, of course, but they're all the same construction. And so, ideally parts rifles are nice, but you can see that like this is not a difficult bolt to disassemble, and the parts are very simple. So I think disassembly of one of these is key the first time out, and see what's involved and have a look. And there's nothing wrong with getting that pin out and pulling the firing pin out and cleaning it up if it's an old rifle and it's never been used. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a pin that goes all the way through. You just drift it out, and not a difficult part to insert. But anyway, I thought I'd share this because that was kind of my goal of my channel, was to share information about obscure rifles that there was very little information available, especially on YouTube for. So in this one I covered the bolt, and in the next one I'll cover the double set trigger of this particular model. Some don't have double set triggers, but I'm fortunate to have one, so I'll cover that one, and I'll show you what that one is about, a couple of quirks with that, and compare it to the Schutz's 5039. And then we can move on to other cool stuff about the rifle. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day.